It's 9 o'clock. I thought it was 8 o'clock out there, but you informed me you're not in your usual home and you're in Switzerland, right?
Correct, yes.
Switzerland. Switzerland. So it's 9 o'clock your time in the evening. So everybody listening, I want you to appreciate that he's giving up his night to tell us about Finimize and kind of his story. And Finimize really came on my radar as I got into kind of building communities and getting into the community world, came across it. But then I most recently got to be on one of your webinars about Bitcoin.
Sorry,
got
hung up.
You're back.
Sorry, I think there was a time lag. That must be on my end. Usually it's fine. Sometimes, every once in a while this happens, but
okay. No worries.
No worries. Sorry about that.
That's all right. No, that's fine. And if it happens in the middle of it, like I'll edit if I need to. So no big deal.
Okay, cool.
So I'm going to bring back, so it's Switzerland. So I don't say it wrong this time. All right. Yeah. So it's 9 o'clock Switzerland time. I thought it was going to be 8 o'clock UK and felt bad about having Max come on to talk to us, but I want everybody listening to appreciate that he's giving up some sleep hours potentially to talk to us about Finimize and everything that they're doing over there. And, I found the community as I got into building the AGC and building out my own community for financial advisors with a friend, Taylor Schulte. And I just was blown away about how large you guys are. And as I begin to learn the story about where you came from and your team came from, I just think it's awesome. And I'm all for financial literacy and getting more and more people to take control of their finances. And I was fortunate enough to be a part of one of your webinars lately about Bitcoin and where that fits into. So I think it's an awesome platform. I think you guys are doing great work, and I'm excited for more people, if they're not already aware of it, to learn about it. But Max, before we get to Finimize, can you kind of give us a little bit of your background? So one of the things I love is entrepreneurship, and you had a great entrepreneurial journey that allowed you to go launch Finimize. So maybe share a little bit of that story with everybody.
Yeah, would love to. Thanks for having me. So I've only ever had a real job, quote unquote, a year, or maybe a year and 2 months. And the funny thing is I was working at a consulting firm, and I just got straight out of college, and we had a partner there, and I tried to convince him to start a consulting business with me. So I've always kind of had that entrepreneurial itch, it seems. And it was kind of, for me, this whole love and passion for digital products really goes back quite a while. I was one of those kids who, I think was one of the first kids at my school who built a website. I'm not a technical person, but I kind of just taught myself back in the days with like geocities.com, where you could host your own website, etc. And kind of discovered that passion for that space. And then in my final year at college, I did a summer internship at eBay, and I re-sparked that curiosity in these digital products there. And like I said, then went to go and work in a consulting firm that was very focused on like sports, media, technology, and pretty quickly realized that I was just thinking all day about like what business can I start. And I played around with a couple of ideas, like really random ideas. One was like a social network. Another one was like a customized chocolate sort of factory platform. So a whole host of ideas that came out, but ended up ultimately starting an e-commerce business with a couple of friends, and did that out of Zurich, and built one of the largest e-commerce businesses in the country. Within Switzerland, we were the largest after Amazon. And so we served 25% of all households, which was pretty crazy, and had a higher brand awareness than British Airways. And so we're a pretty big fish in a small but very wealthy pond. And did that for a couple of years, and then sold the business to one of the largest media houses here. And then went off and started Finimize, a completely different business. And very much driven out of a personal experience, which I'm happy to dive into. But that's the pre-story before Finimize.
Before we get to the personal experience that led to Finimize, because I definitely want to go down that path, I want to go back to you being an entrepreneur. And I have 3 boys, and I did not grow up entrepreneurial. I wouldn't even say when I started my own business, I was an entrepreneur. I was just an advisor who started a business. But over the last 5 years, I have become extremely entrepreneurial. My question being, what did your parents do? What life experience? What made you have that entrepreneurial mindset all the time?
It's a good question. I think first of all, my dad's also an entrepreneur. So he actually came to Germany as a teenager, and then stayed there, and originally worked in a normal job, and then ended up starting his own company. And so I think I've always been exposed to this entrepreneurial lifestyle. I think, one of those things where, your dad doesn't take as many holidays perhaps as other people, because if he goes on holiday, then the business might not run as well, etc. So I think I've always been exposed to that, and then I think I've had this fascination with it, and I grew up, I think, also during an era. I always think it's interesting, like my generation. I don't know how old you are, but perhaps you're in a similar generation, where we were the last people to experience the life before the internet. And so when I grew up, I was like 13, 14, 15, that age. And like, I remember Napster was a huge thing. And so those were like the really early days of the internet. And I think that's what sparked this fascination with the space. And there was like so much stuff that you could do. And there was like so easy, quote unquote, for you to like build something from scratch and like put a website out there and just like show it to people. And it just felt really, really exciting. And I think some of the most exciting products are from that like early era. And then you started having that first wave of startups. You started having like a Facebook, obviously, but also slightly smaller startups. Like in Berlin, you had SoundCloud, that first generation of startups, which were like true pioneers. Nowadays everybody has a startup, it feels like. But I remember following those companies and thinking like, wow, that's so cool. Like they're literally just building something from scratch. And so I think I've always had that fascination. And then I've explored other careers through internships and stuff like that, but I always found myself coming back specifically to the internet space because of that fascination that I've had from an early age on.
I want to thank
you. I think perhaps what I would add there actually is, since you asked me about being parent, so I think one of the things actually perhaps that also sparked this was like my dad gave me an old computer, I remember, when I was like 3.5. And this was back in the day when it was really unusual to have a computer, but he gave me his old one and I played around with it. And I did like, there was this video game called Reader Rabbit, and that's how you learn how to read on MS-DOS. And then I think that already was like that first exposure to this like digital world, which perhaps also was a trigger in the way then I started thinking about building businesses, etc., and that attraction to the digital space.
Well, first, I want to thank you for thinking I might be the same age. So I'm 38. So Napster was big when I was in college. So I'm a little bit older than you. But the other thing is that I don't care if the boys become entrepreneurs and start businesses. I would love for them to, but I want them to have that mindset where they're curious, they try to figure out problems, and they're not afraid to take risks. And you give me some confidence that some of the things that we're doing as parents are helping them, because my wife owns her business as well. So the comment about dad didn't take the same holidays because they had to work the business. We explain to the kids a lot of times that our lives are different than other people's lives. Like mom and dad have to do different things different because we have our own business, but that allows us to do things that other parents can't do. And but
exactly,
the computer story makes you think of something. I really want, like, I've never built a computer before, but I want to go get the components, pull up a YouTube video, and build a PC with the boys, because they want a PC to game. They want to play Fortnite on it. But I want to build a PC with them and then mine Bitcoin with it to turn them on to that world. So we're going to build a PC, but we're going to turn it into something that could financially benefit the boys later down the road. And then through that PC building, if they want to save up money and buy PC parts to go build a gaming PC, they can do that. So I want to expose them to it and find ways that might pique their interest to send them down that path. So your story gives me a little bit of confidence. I might be moving them down the direction I hope they go.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I think, yeah, go
ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I think there's a lot of the really cool stuff. There's like, I think a computer called Raspberry Pi. I don't know if you've come across that.
Yeah.
Which seems really cool for children to sort of wrap their head around how to build computers. So I think it's a really cool idea, and I would 100% do the same if I were you.
So let's go back to your story, not my story in this show. This is all about Max. So what is your personal experience that led you to start Finimize?
Yeah. So what happened was I was saving money each month, because that was kind of the thing that everybody told me. And they were like, hey, as you're approaching 30, you probably want to start saving some money, etc. So I did that. And just every month I put money from my salary onto a savings account and kind of rinse and repeat, and fast forward a couple of months or a year or something like that. And I looked at my savings account and I realized amazing news. I've built up savings. And then the immediate follow-up question was, cool, so what do I do with these savings now? And my first instinct was I went to go to my bank, and they had a financial advisor there. And so what happened was that the moment I walked through the door, they had already laid out all the brochures from the bank onto the table. And I noticed that each brochure had the bank's logo on it. And I very quickly realized, although this was a really pleasant experience, this was going to be a sales pitch for them to get me to invest my money with them. And I knew right away, okay, I'm not here for the sales pitch. So I knew this isn't the right solution for me. And I went back home and I started to inform and educate myself as much as I could on the topic of financial planning, but also specifically then, I guess, investing, and found it really, really convoluted and somewhat difficult to really wrap my head around. There's so much content out there. There's all these SEO optimized pages that are ultimately trying to sell you something through an affiliate link or something like that. And basically then would just inform myself as much as I could. And in the evenings, I would meet friends of mine, and a lot of them were working in the finance space. And so I would just bombard them with questions, all the questions that I had from my day's worth of reading. And at the same time, I bumped into people who were in the same boat as I was. So they had some savings, but they were lacking that real finance know-how. And what they didn't have, though, is that community around them of people like myself, like I had, who could share their experiences and share their knowledge to empower all these people to make smarter investment decisions. And that became the genesis moment for Finimize, where I started to dive deeper and did a bit of research, and very quickly found out that I certainly wasn't the only one with this problem. So there are 86% of millennials save each month, but they keep more than half of their savings in cash, as I was doing, because there isn't a suitable way for them to get that financial education, financial literacy, financial guidance. Mm-hmm. And then you ask the question, why is this the case? And the answer, there's been numerous studies on this. And when we now have the luxury to ask our own community, we find the same thing, which is that within this bracket of millennials who do have savings, 75% of them say that they don't take action because they lack the know-how to do so. Mm-hmm. And the remaining 25% who do take action, out of that 25%, 90% of them say when they do take action, they previously consulted their friends or the media. Mm-hmm. And so that's the insight with which we've been building Finimize, to really take all of that information that's out there, wrap it into a format that's easily accessible, that's engaging, that's bite-sized, and then connect you with other people who've gone through the same experience as you have, who have no incentive of selling you anything, but are just part of the same community and want to help each other. And that is the foundation of Finimize.
I love the community component. I mentioned I helped start a community for financial advisors, and I really see the benefit of it. And the concept of the community just came from this natural community that was forming on Twitter amongst financial advisors. And Twitter is not the best platform because of the anonymity that's out there and the nastiness that happens. So kind of trying to find a safe place to get these people together. Now, our community as of today has like 125 advisors in it. I've got your guys' website pulled up. So you guys have over 600,000 people in the Finimize, and I'm sure that's numbers probably continuing to grow every day.
Updated,
So
yeah.
I mean, you guys have definitely found a pain point for young professionals and are doing a tremendous job, which is why I wanted to have you on. I want more people taking control of their finances, because the way I look at it is, I talk about this with the advisors, rising tide lifts all ships. You guys aren't necessarily competing with me. I don't think that, when eventually people need planning, that's not Finimize's goal. Your goal is to empower them, educate them, get them going. And a lot of them may never need to work with a financial advisor because the community and everything is providing that to them, but that eventually some of them might. I just love it because you're getting more people to get better. And at the end of the day, we end up getting lumped into financial services, even though you're, a financial community kind of in the internet technology space, it's still finance. And if you're making finance look better, then that indirectly makes us financial advisors out there look better as well. So that's why I'm a huge fan of what you guys are doing. I blurbed and put Public in the outline too at the very end, but Public was on public.com. I love what they're doing, because at the end of the day, it's making financial literacy more accessible. It's bringing it to more people who may not have gotten it before, which is good for everybody. So I'm a huge fan of what you guys are doing.
And I think the way, to your point, I think the way that we think about it is, the analogy I like to give is pharmacy and hospitals. So if you have a cold, you go to the pharmacy, you don't go to the hospital. If you've broken your leg, you go to the hospital, you don't go to the pharmacy. And the way I kind of look at the financial advice space is, if you have a cold, which I would argue the majority of the people have, i.e. they have they have some cash reserves, some cash savings, they might want to invest in it. They probably don't need a complex financial plan to help them out. They can go to the pharmacy. As soon as you start having a more complex life, like you might have a mortgage, you might, worst case, be divorced, you might have a lot of debt or whatever, that starts becoming a bit more complex, and then you want to go to the hospital. And so I think currently where the gap in the market is, and for example, in the UK, this is often referred to as the advice gap. So these are people who have 10 to 200,000 in investable assets, where it might not make sense either economically for them to go to a financial advisor, or the financial advisor, depending on the model, might say, hey, actually, you're not wealthy enough to sit down here. And so we're really catering to that advice gap, as it's often referred to.
So let's talk about growing from the 1,000 readers to the movement of 600,000. How has Finimize been able to grow at that level? Because how long have you guys been around?
Yeah, so we're now we've been going since so we started the company in August of 2016. And we're now closer to around about like 1 million people. So I guess we haven't updated the website in a while.
Update that website. Update that website stat.
And so yeah, it's an interesting story. We up until recently, we've never done any paid marketing, and that was one of the things that we always really prided ourselves with. And the way we started was we got the first couple thousand users through blog posts we got featured on. We got hunted on Product Hunt, that kind of stuff. That got us initial traction. And then we started doing larger partnerships. We would do exchanges with like a Wired magazine or like Atlantic, Quartz, those kind of guys. And they would promote us, we would promote them. And we had a referral program. We had a lot of word of mouth. We had a student ambassador program that, especially in the early days, was a huge driver for us. And then basically we started having a paid product, which is our subscription product. And now we're starting to also invest into paid marketing. But for the longest time, we never spent a dime on marketing.
And tell me a little bit about the team that you put together to do this, because it's not just you. I mean, I looked at the team, and it's an impressive group of people that you've assembled to make this company grow. Tell me a little bit about kind of how you structured that. Were the people you already knew? Kind of how did the team grow?
Yeah. So we started, perhaps I'll give you a bit of a history on the products that we and the services that we've been offering, because then the team grew around those. So we started off with a really, really simple product, a daily financial newsletter that explains what's happening in the finance world in 3 minutes and explaining most importantly to you, why should you care? So why should you care if inflation goes up or goes down? What does it actually mean for you personally? And the way it started was the initial setup was there was a writer and there was myself. I was the editor. And so the writer I found through my personal network. He actually, first writer of Finimize, actually went to college with me, and then I think worked at an investment bank for 7 years. And he was the first person to produce the content. And then it was my job as the editor to make sure that it's 3 minutes, that it's accessible, that there's no jargon, that I fundamentally understand it, and I would be the representative of the users. Then we grew that. We started hiring more people around the content side, etc. And then we launched our mobile app, and our community started to evolve very organically. And so now the way we're set up was we have our analyst team. So we have 6 analysts. We always hire analysts. We don't really hire financial journalists. So we want people who have the financial expertise, which you typically get by working in the industry. And so they've worked at, most of them have been equity research analysts before at Goldman Sachs, at Schroders, at Fidelity, some really, really strong brands that they've previously worked in the finance industry. Then we have our community team. So they empower our community to host all these meetups all over the world. We have a product and engineering team. We have a growth team, and we have a business development team that deals with primarily the commercial side of the business, because we sell advertising and we also sell content licenses. And that's the setup for us.
So get in the beginning of the day. So it was you and one other writer. Where did you develop the confidence that you could write about personal finance just from your personal experience, that you were giving good information or breaking things down? Because I wouldn't feel comfortable launching a website about building computers, since we talked about it earlier. Even though I'll do it in the future, but like, that's not my expertise. I didn't come from that world. So not that you weren't qualified, because at the end of the day, you can learn this stuff on your own. What gave you the confidence to be able to stake your next business on finance, which was a place that you were kind of self-learning on your own?
Yeah, I think that's perhaps on the surface from the start was my weakness, but I think ultimately also was my power, because I didn't come from the industry. And so essentially what happened with the first writer, and then we very quickly diversified to having multiple writers. But what happened was I would do what I did with those friends that I met in the evenings after I informed myself throughout the day. I would ask them all the questions like, okay, so the Fed raised interest rates. Like, can you explain to me, like, why does that affect stock prices? I don't understand the connection here. Okay, and then he would explain it to me, and then in his head, it was so obvious that there wasn't a need to explain the connection. And then I was like, oh, okay, like maybe can you like write it out explicitly so that tomorrow when I'll read it again, I'll probably have forgotten what you told me. Just make it explicit. And like a bunch of these things would happen. And so 2 things there. One was from, like I said, we've always been hiring ex-finance industry experts. And so that, to answer the first question, that gave me the confidence because these people knew what they were talking about. And we very quickly had people, I remember one quick anecdote. We were just started and we got a phone call from a PA out of New York. And she said, hey, I have my boss on the line. He wants to talk to you guys. And we're like, okay, cool. Put him through. And it was this guy who was like, hey guys, like I came across your website online somehow. I've been running a hedge fund for 30 years in New York with billions in assets under management, and I have access to all the information in the world. And I just wanted to tell you guys that I've never read anything as good as what you guys put out every day.
Wow.
And then hung up the phone. Like it was like a 5-minute conversation. And I think we had a lot of these anecdotes. And so I think we were never so worried about people not trusting us because we knew the people who were writing the content were really good. And then on the other side, I think the part of the reason why I had the confidence into going into this is because I guess I was confident or humble enough to ask quote unquote stupid questions. So explain to me why are the bond yield and price inversely related? I don't get it.
Mm-hmm.
And the honest answer is most people don't get it. But they're not happy to ask. They're not willing to ask the question. You know, when I started reading the traditional financial newspapers, they would assume all these connections that you understood how everything's connected, and the reality is most people just don't. And so what we try to do is we try to spell it out for you.
Mm-hmm. No, I love it. And I didn't mean to suggest that you couldn't. I just think that like going into a new profession in this area.
I mean, I couldn't. I'm not a finance guy, so you're right. I couldn't.
Right.
I'm the one who asks the question and who makes sure that that it's accessible.
Right.
But we have to trust the people who write the content that they're good, and so far we've fared pretty well with that.
Oh, that's awesome. I love it. And I think being an entrepreneur, going into something new, you've got to have some amount of confidence, even if you're doubting yourself a little bit. So no, I love it. I think it's great. And I love your comment about not being afraid to ask the dumb questions, just to work your way through it. So as it's building out, you've got it's starting. At what point did the community become, was that always something you wanted to build? Or is that something that, hey, we've got these subscribers and like now there's this natural community forming. Let's double down on that.
So the irony of all of this is that I don't have a media background. I don't have a finance background. I don't have a community background. and I probably, to be totally honest with myself and with you, I probably never planned it the way it turned out. So, I mean, first of all, we never planned to have a newsletter. I built a WordPress page and I put the content onto the WordPress page, and I realized very quickly nobody is going onto my WordPress page here. So there was crickets. So I started emailing people, hey, check out my website every day. And I saw that people would open the email, they wouldn't go to the website. And then I said, hey, let's just take all the content from the website and put it in the newsletter. That's what created the newsletter. Then one day we said, hey, why don't we meet? I think we had like 30,000, 40,000 users. We're like, why don't we meet some of these people? And we put out a blast into our email saying, hey, we're going to meet in a pub in East London. And what happened was 50 people showed up, and very quickly the entire pub was filled with Finimize users, which was crazy. And so then we said, okay, let's do this more often. And we started hosting these events, and like 100 people would show up, 200 people would show up, 300 people, like 400 people. And we were super surprised. We're like, oh, this is like a one-hit wonder. Like next time nobody will show up. And it just, people kept showing up. And then we would post photos on our social media, or we would like write about it in the newsletter. And people started writing into us and being, hey, I live in LA. I want you guys to host a meetup in LA. And then like someone would be from Sydney, like, I want to have a meetup in Sydney. And we were sitting there being like, that sounds awesome. We would love to get on the plane now and fly to Sydney and then to LA to host a meetup. But unfortunately, we can't do this. And so one day we were like, why don't you guys host the meetup? We're going to tell you how to do it. We've developed a playbook and we empowered them to do it. And that gave birth to the community. And so now, like every quarter, we have a couple thousand people applying to be a host. And then we pick a couple, I think we always pick like between 50 to 100. So a small fraction, because we want to make sure that they represent the brand well. And then they go off and they run with it. And they do it 100% because they believe in the mission. We don't pay them. We don't give them any incentive. It's all fully on a voluntary basis. And cool stuff happens. Like we have a really active community in Nigeria, which obviously we've never planned. We have a really active community also like in India. Like one of our hosts on his own initiative recruited 3 other hosts, and they went on a road show into 3 different Indian cities to host meetups. Again, fully on a voluntary basis. And so now there's a meetup happening every single day of the week, somewhere around the world. And obviously then COVID came and none of that happened and everything went virtual. And so last year we connected between 10 to 15,000 people at these physical meetups, which was really awesome. And then this year we've already connected something like 30,000 people, because obviously virtual allows us to reach more people. So it's been really exciting.
So when you think about like the mission of Finimize, you've got the education, the community. What's the underlying mission behind Finimize, and what you got, like where you guys have come from and where you want to go in the future? What's the mission for the future?
So the mission that we've defined for ourselves from day one is very much in line with the story that I told you about myself, having access to that information. And so we say we want to empower you to become your own financial advisor by giving you access to this information. And the information can be coming from our analyst team, or it can be coming from the community. But we want to make sure that you get all the information that you need in order to make smart decisions. And one of the things we say is, if ultimately you say your decision is not to do anything, that's also fine. We have zero incentive for you to do anything. But we want to make sure that you do that out of a position of knowledge and power rather than of ignorance. And so that's what we try to do. And then ultimately we have these two tenets: content, community, and that's how we try to push forward that information democratization.
So as a new user goes to Finimize, there's all this information. Like, what can they expect? What's the best way for somebody listening today? Obviously I'm going to link to the website in the show notes, but when they go in there, what's the best way to maximize Finimize?
So the typical journey that we see is someone either signs up for the newsletter for free, and then they can read the daily brief every morning, or they download our app on the Apple or Android App Store, and then they get a subscription. Start their day with the daily brief. If you listen to it, it's 7 minutes long. If you read it, it's 3 minutes to read. Two most important stories of the day. Then let's imagine that day we report about BlackRock saying, hey, we are going to double down on sustainable investing. That might spark your curiosity, your interest. You say, hey, I've always been thinking about this sustainable investing. I want to find out more. We link you to one of over, I think, 150 audio and text guides that we have in our content library. And that one is all about understanding the ins and outs of sustainable investing. And we explain to you how it works, what to look out for, etc. You then might decide, hey, this sounds super interesting. I want to get into it. You then go into, we have chat groups, or you can go, I guess also write us an email, and we have this Q&A feature. But let's say you go to one of the chat groups, you ask other Finimize users, hey, I'm really interested in this sustainable investing topic. Does anybody have any tips, recommendations for platforms? Where can I get into this? Some people might give you a couple of recommendations, and then one person might say, hey, you know what? Later this week in your town, there's going to be a meetup around sustainable investing. And so with the example of sustainable investing, we had a meetup. We had the global head of sustainable investing from JP Morgan. She came to talk to our audience. And then our users could learn from a real expert on the topic, and they could learn from other people like themselves to really understand ins and outs. And so within a couple of days, you're able to wrap your head around a topic that usually would have taken you weeks to wrap your head around. And that's this interplay between content and community that we're constantly trying to play.
So where do you see the community most engaged? Is there one area that they, like, if you looked at it, if you had a heat map, that's like where they're most engaged?
You mean geographically?
Oh, no, more of like content wise. As far as Finimize users, are they most interested in, is it most interested in investing? Is it most interested in personal finance, or is it really kind of a broad spectrum?
I would say there's two main areas. One is buying and saving for a house. Okay. We always see there's huge demand for that. And then I think the other one, probably the largest one, is investing. We do have other personal finance content, how to think about debt, how to get rid of bad debt, all that stuff. But I would say the most demand that we receive is for investing. And then I think within that, there's a couple of interesting general trends like ESG, so sustainable investing, that kind of stuff. But overall, I think one of the main values that people get is we help them spot interesting investing trends. So because we hire these analysts, they go off and do their own research and then present these insights to our audience. One recent one that was very well received was the market for power for battery storage might be a larger market than the entire electric vehicle market. And then the analyst that we had laid out the case for this, and then say, hey, here's a couple of ETFs you could look into if you believe this thesis. Here's a couple of companies that are interesting. We never say you should do ABC, this is a recommendation, whatever. We just always say, here's what we find interesting, or specifically what this analyst finds interesting. And if you believe that that's interesting as well, then here's how you can get some exposure to it. And so it's really that insight that we put a huge emphasis on. We always want to deliver insights to our audience.
Where do you see community playing in a business's future? Whether, I mean, obviously it's gonna be a big part of Finimize, but as you think about businesses looking to grow for the future, where do you think community plays? Is it something that every business should strive for, or is it really just kind of, it'll naturally happen if it's meant to happen?
Probably both. In our case, it naturally happened, very organically happened. But I think you're starting to see it. Public you spoke with last week. I think they're doing a great job with this kind of stuff. And there's a whole range of companies, not so much actually in the finance world, but in the digital world. There's some really great communities out there. I think why would you do this? I think there's a couple of reasons and a couple of drivers. I think number one is, and I think this might not always apply, so probably one of the following will apply. Number one is it will help differentiate your brand. Certainly with us, it's been a very very good side effect of it. Number two is that it might drive word of mouth. Obviously, the more people you have in a community, the more they start talking about it. Hey, tonight I'm going to this Finimize meetup. So word of mouth is another one. I think then also user-generated content. That's one of the things that conventionally from stuff like Reddit, etc. We're also finding that's a really interesting avenue for us. So we have all these meetups, and we're starting to record them, and we're starting to turn them into real user-generated audio content, and are seeing a lot of demand for that. And then I think the final piece for us is maybe 2 points, actually. One is we see that people who engage with the community have a significantly higher retention rate than those who don't. So it drives real business value for us as well. And then the last benefit is, our content creators are hugely have a huge advantage in that they get all the information from our community. What is it that they're actually interested in, so that they can go off and produce better content. And that interplay is really, really valuable. And so I think there's a bunch of different things that you can focus on. Probably I would pick one or two. And then I think community can really drive value. I think what's important with community is I think the word community gets misused a little bit. So I think what's not a community is when a brand has a huge Facebook following. That's not a community. And if we would have a huge Instagram following, we wouldn't describe that as our community. A community happens when there is a peer-to-peer interaction, and that drives value. And so what I was saying is, when people go to the meetups, part of the value that they get is that interaction with other members, and that is for us the community. It's not when we broadcast content to you. So it's really that interpersonal peer-to-peer interaction that has to be valuable, and that's, I think, what creates a real community.
One of the things I think is real key is, I think communities, I think the reason you've had success is it just organically happened. I think with community building, I almost think it has to be organically done. Okay. Maybe you can put some structures in to attract people, and maybe you have a goal of creating a community, but I don't think you can force it. And being genuine behind it is critical. So I think the fact that you started with one thing, attracted a certain type of people, and then you figured out how to drive that relationship deeper by getting those people together. So I think that for those people out there who might think of adding a community, it's not as easy as going from 1,000 to 1,000,000. Like, you have to go about it the right way. And a big key of that is getting the right people in, because you need people. You mentioned people not contributing. There's a place for non-contributors, but you need people in the community, believing in the community, contributing to make the community successful.
Exactly. And I think for us, the key has been having a mission that resonates with people, because I think a mission that resonates creates a common purpose, and that's what gets people excited. And then 100%. So I think there's this rule of, like, I forget, it's either 1 to 99 or 10 to 90, where like 10% of the people create all of the content, and then 90% are lurkers. And I think we'd find something similar with us. But what's interesting is that the lurkers describe as of getting a lot of value just from lurking as well. So I think that's fine, as long as you can encourage people to get engaged as much as they can.
So I'm curious, as the founder and getting these things starting up, is there, like, what's one thing you look at that you learned through the community, personal finance related, that has been instrumental for you? So you created this thing, this community, this company, and now you're better off with financial knowledge or financially because of something that you would have never gotten if it wasn't for the community.
That's a good question. I think I probably wouldn't say there's one specific thing. I think it's rather getting exposed to new ideas constantly, and new, perhaps also investment angles or ways of thinking about making an investment. One of the things that we always hear that people really appreciate about our content as well as our community is that they learn to think like an analyst. And I think, in a very similar vein, when I engage with our community and I either learn from our other users, or if I learn from experts who we invite, I think it's always that, what can you do to refine your own mental framework for how you structure your finances? And I think often it is actually simplicity is what's really interesting. So when we have financial advisors as guest speakers sometimes, when I ask them, like, okay, so like, what are you invested in? They typically say, I'm just invested in Vanguard Life Strategy ETF. That's it. I don't do any of the other stuff. Very plain and simple. And that simplicity, simplicity with everything that you do in business and in life is always a huge value driver. And I think that's been one of the key takeaways for me, is like, simplicity is also good with your personal finances.
No, that's good. And I think as an entrepreneur, you've got to love all these new ideas for you to explore and look at and consider. So it's got to be a good thing for you. So before I get to the final question, there's one question I'd kick myself if I didn't ask. Finimize, how'd you come up with the name?
So the name is a combination of finance and minimize. So bringing it down to its essence. And that's what came up with the name Finimize. Nice.
I like it. All right. So that brings us to the final question that everybody gets. When you look at yourself, what's your superpower? What's the characteristic about yourself that's allowed you to build Finimize and reach your goals, or separate you from other founders out there?
So I think it's a very good question. And I thought about this before I came on here. And if I look back, I've built a online retailer, and I, up until that point, have never stepped foot into a warehouse. We ended up having 60 people working for us just in the warehouse. I started an online media community business in the finance space. Like I said earlier on, I have zero experience in any of that. And so I think what I would like to think is that the common thread here is, I'm really, really open-minded to new worlds, new ideas. And in fact, I think I get very excited about them. And what allows me to do this is I think I'm a fairly quick learner. So I wrap my head around new things pretty quickly. I wrapped my head around when we started Finimize. A lot of these terms were new to me, like ETF and all that stuff. I've heard of, but I wasn't super familiar. But I was able to very, very quickly wrap my head around it. I do a lot of reading. I listen to a lot of podcasts, and I think I'm one of those people. When I find something interesting, I get like really, really obsessed with it, and I just like run down the rabbit hole as fast and as deep as I can. And I think that's what allowed me to build 2 businesses with 0 prior experience in either of them.
All right. Follow-up question. I think it's a great superpower first. What's the most recent rabbit hole you've gone down?
Probably paid acquisition.
Okay.
So like I said, we've never done it. And so we tried out a lot of different things. We worked with freelancers, contractors, agencies, and I do this together with one other person on our team called Matt. And he has a bit of background in it, but not really. And he's also one of those people who learns really, really quickly. And together, I mean, we now have conversations with people who've been doing this for like 10, 15 years. And we're able to teach them stuff sometimes. And that's one of those things where I just like, I watch YouTube videos from like experts. I listen to podcasts, I read blog posts, I go on Twitter. I share those with people on my team. They do the same. We go on forums. Like I just go all in. Mm-hmm. And so as a result, I think I have a pretty deep understanding in a fairly short amount of time.
So needless to say, paid acquisition is going to work for Finimize here in the near future.
I hope so, yeah.
Awesome. Well, Max, where can people find you? I'll link to the Finimize website and get people going that direction to check it out. But if they want to follow you, see what you're up to, maybe learn what rabbit hole you're going down after that, where can they find you?
So I'm on Twitter. My Twitter handle is Whole Earth Web, which is also very bizarre, similar to Finimize. So Whole Earth Web is my handle. I can tell you in a second why Whole Earth Web if you're interested. Then we're Finimize. We're on all social media. We're on Twitter, Instagram, and obviously you can sign up to our newsletter for free on finimize.com, and you can download our app again for free on the Apple App Store or the Android Play Store.
Yeah, you're not getting out of here without telling us the handle. Real quick, tell the handle, and then we'll let you go.
Got it. So, like I said, I was really fascinated by the early days of the internet, and started going down that rabbit hole. Like, how did the whole World Wide Web start? And found out that there was a really interesting collaboration of the hippie movement and the U.S. military, and they kind of like helped each other build the World Wide Web. And within the hippie movement, there was this thing that came out, this catalog called the Whole Earth Catalog. And this kind of became this really iconic publication to help people like live on land and like farm themselves and all of that stuff. Mm-hmm. And the same people who put that out helped build the World Wide Web. And so I thought when I got my Twitter handle, I was still fairly young, and I thought, I'm super clever. I'm just going to combine Whole Earth and Web, and I created the word Whole Earth Web.
Gotcha.
So that's the story there.
Awesome. Gotcha. Well, I appreciate you staying a little bit longer to share that story. Again, Max, I'll link everybody so they can find you. We'll get them over to Finimize, get them subscribed as well. But I appreciate taking the time to share the story with us, open everybody's eyes about what you guys are doing. And again, as a financial professional, I want people understanding their finances, whether that's with an advisor or on their own. So I think what you guys are building and have built is phenomenal. So I love seeing what you guys are doing. So thanks again for joining us.
Thank you, and I appreciate you taking the initiative and all the effort to spread the word around new financial services in your role as a financial advisor and as an entrepreneur. I think the more we can do stuff like that, the better for the ecosystem.
I agree. All right, everybody, thanks for listening, watching. If you're on YouTube, allaboutyourbenjamins.com. Show notes will be there so you can find everything, and we'll see you all in the next episode.